March 20th, 1991. A Cuban fighter pilot punches the afterburner on a stolen MiG-23 and rockets north across the Straits of Florida, 15 feet above the ocean. American radar never sees him coming. He lands at Naval Air Station Key West, requests asylum, and is free. Within days, Cuba seizes his wife and 2 sons as leverage. They will never leave the island. For 21 months, Orestes begs the world for help. Presidents, the UN, the Red Cross. Castro ignores every single one. But here's what no one expected. Raúl Castro sends a taunt, "Come get them yourself if you're so brave." It was meant to humiliate. Instead, it gave a desperate father an idea. On December 19th, 1992, Orestes climbs into a 40-year-old propeller plane with one landing under his belt and aims it straight back at the country that sentenced him to death. His wife and 2 boys are waiting on a Cuban highway in orange shirts, 60 seconds from freedom or a prison cell. How did a lone father outsmart Cuba's entire air defense? And what happens when a dictator's taunt backfires? In March 1991, Major Orestes Lorenzo Perez is one of Cuba's most decorated pilots. Trained on Aero L-29 Delphin jets and MiG-21 fish beds at Soviet flight academies, he has flown combat missions in Angola supporting the Marxist government and returned to Cuba for a second tour of advanced instruction in the USSR. Now he is stationed at Santa Clara Air Base, 165 miles east of Havana, flying a MiG-23BN Flogger, a variable sweep-wing interceptor capable of Mach 2.3. On paper, he is the revolution's ideal soldier. In reality, Mikhail Gorbachev's glasnost has cracked his faith wide open. He watched the regime arrest General Arnaldo Ochoa Sanchez in June 1989 for alleged drug trafficking, a show trial most officers recognized as a warning to anyone sympathetic to Soviet reform, and execute him by firing squad 31 days later. He sees propaganda posters rotting over breadlines, catches glimpses of Miami's skyline from altitude, and measures it against Havana's decay. He reaches a conclusion he will later put into words in his memoir, Humane Socialism Does Not Exist. Orestes does not want to abandon Cuba. He wants it to change. But by early 1991, he is certain it will not, and he makes the calculation that has tormented every Cuban defector before him: get out first, then extract the family through international pressure. On the morning of March 20th, he says goodbye to Victoria. She must pretend she knows nothing. He boards MiG-23 tail number 722 for what the squadron logs record as a routine training sortie. It will be the simplest flight he ever makes and the most expensive, because the moment his wheels leave Cuban soil, his wife and sons become hostages. The MiG roars down the runway. Orestes punches the afterburner, drops to wave-top altitude, and rockets north across the Straits of Florida, hiding in sea clutter to dodge Cuban radar. The crossing takes minutes, less time than a commute across Miami. He is alone over open water in a stolen military jet, and if Cuban ground control has figured out what happened, a pair of interceptors could be on his tail already. But nothing follows. Over Boca Chica Key, he extends flaps, landing gear, and air brakes, then waggles the wings 3 times in the universal signal for friendly intent. American radar never detected him inbound. The first anyone at Naval Air Station Key West knows of a Cuban MiG is the sight of one circling the field at low altitude. He deploys the drogue parachute on the runway, rolls to a stop, climbs out of the cockpit, and stands at attention on American soil for the first time in his life. In broken English, he manages the only words that matter: political asylum. The Navy officer who meets him on the tarmac shakes his hand, and by noon, Orestes Lorenzo Perez is on a transport to Washington for debriefing. The MiG-23 sits on the Key West apron under armed guard. Within 9 days, it will be returned to a Cuban delegation by diplomatic agreement. The price of freedom arrives the same afternoon. Back in Cuba, state security descends on the Lorenzo home. Victoria and the boys, Rainiel, 11, and Alejandro, 6, are informed they will never be allowed to leave the island. No trial, no formal charge, just the quiet machinery of a dictatorship holding leverage. Officers tell Victoria to forget her husband. They call him a traitor, a homosexual, a man planning to marry an American woman. Whatever lie might make her denounce him publicly. The regime offers a new house, a car, even a state-installed telephone if she will cooperate. She refuses every offer. She holds on to the last thing Orestes told her before he climbed into the MiG. "I will come get you by any means necessary." Orestes settles in Alexandria, Virginia. He has asylum, a debriefing file thicker than a phone book, and a country ready to hand him a new life. He also has phone access to Victoria, every call recorded by Cuban intelligence, and one piece of information that changes everything. She tells him plainly, they will not let us leave. What did it cost Orestes to hear those words, free and safe while his family remained caged? And what would a man trained to fly at twice the speed of sound do when every legal channel on Earth told him to be patient? For 21 months, Orestes Lorenzo Perez attacked the problem the way the civilized world told him to. He drove through every open door. He met with officials at the U.S. State Department, pleaded before the United Nations Commission on Human Rights, petitioned the Red Cross, lobbied more than 50 senators and congressmen. He gave press interviews, delivered speeches to Cuban exile communities from Miami to New Jersey. He secured personal letters to Fidel Castro from President George H.W. Bush, from Coretta Scott King, even from Mikhail Gorbachev. In the summer of 1992, when Castro traveled to Madrid for the Iberian-American Summit during the Olympic Games, Orestes staged a week-long hunger strike on the steps of the Spanish capital to shame the dictator before the world press. The story went global. Newspapers printed photographs of the boys. Senators signed group letters. Bush mentioned the Lorenzo family by name in a televised Miami speech, calling on Castro to let them go. And every morning after every headline, Orestes woke up in Alexandria and dialed the same number in Havana, listening to Victoria's voice through a line he knew was monitored, searching for signs she was holding together. One by one, every avenue collapsed. Havana shrugged off diplomatic cables like a man brushing off gnats. The Cuban government had zero incentive to negotiate holding defectors' families. Hostage was the system was working as designed. Every pilot still flying in Cuba watched what happened to Victoria and the boys. That was the point. The hostages were not leverage in a negotiation. They were a message broadcast to every uniform on the island. It told every other pilot in the Air Force exactly what happens when you betray the revolution. International law turned out to be powerless against a dictator who simply refused to answer. An estimated 11,000 to 13,000 Cubans gained U.S. residency each year through legal channels. Victoria and the boys had valid American visas, paperwork that should have opened a door and instead collected dust in a drawer. The machinery of diplomacy requires two parties willing to engage. Castro was not willing. He did not need to explain. He needed only to say no, and keep saying it until the world moved on to the next story. If you like this kind of deep story, where a single person goes to war against an entire government, drop a like and subscribe, because the decision Orestes makes next is the part no one saw coming. Back in Cuba, the walls closed tighter around Victoria. The apartment was bugged. The children were followed to school. A patrol van idled near the front door on a rotating schedule. Officers dropped by unannounced, asking the same questions in different orders, looking for cracks. They wanted a public denunciation. Victoria on state television calling her husband a traitor. She never gave them one. Reniel stopped pretending to be brave. Alejandro, the younger boy, had developed a habit of approaching any unfamiliar man in a dark jacket and asking where his father was. Victoria had no answer, except faith. Faith that the man who stole a MiG-23 would find another way. Then Raúl Castro made a mistake that only an arrogant man makes. He underestimated his enemy. Through military officers, he sent a personal message to Victoria intended as mockery, to tell your husband that if he had the nerve to steal an airplane, he should have the nerve to come get you himself. It was the kind of taunt that works on men who are already broken. Orestes was not broken. He was building. The taunt was meant to humiliate, but instead it planted a seed. Because by the autumn of 1992, Orestes had already stopped asking who can rescue my family. He had started asking a far more dangerous question, how do I rescue them myself? Every legal channel had answered. Every government had answered. The silence from Havana had answered. The only voice left was his own. What kind of plan could a lone pilot with no military backing, no diplomatic cover, and a death sentence waiting for him in Cuba possibly devise? And would the same low-altitude trick that fooled radar once work a second time in a plane 50 times slower than a MiG? The plan is built on margins so thin they barely exist. Orestes needs a plane, not a fighter jet, which would trigger every air defense alarm in the Caribbean, but a small civilian twin-engine propeller craft that might pass for a private charter, if anyone glances at it. Through the Valadares Foundation, a human rights organization in Alexandria, founded by former Cuban political prisoner Armando Valadares, he learns that a 1961 Cessna 310 is for sale. Elena Diaz-Verson Amos, the foundation's co-chairwoman, puts up $30,000. The plane is his. Consider the downgrade from a Mach 2 interceptor to a lumbering twin-prop cabin cruiser with a top speed of 200 knots. He is swapping a sword for a bicycle and pedaling into a war zone. He needs a civilian pilot's license. His Cuban military credentials mean nothing in the United States, and if anyone later questions the legality of his flight, he wants paperwork. He trains in Virginia and earns his certificate, but here is the problem that should have stopped him cold before December 19, 1992. Orestes has landed the Cessna 310 exactly once, with an instructor's hand on the yoke beside him. Every other hour of preparation goes into reconnaissance. He pores over satellite imagery and old maps of Cuba's northern coast, searching for a stretch of road long enough and straight enough to serve as a runway. He finds it a 4-lane coastal highway near the beach town of Varadero in Matanzas province, roughly 165 miles east of Havana. It is not an airstrip. It has no markings, no lights, no emergency equipment. It is pavement between palm trees with cars on it. Radar is the wall he must pass through. Cuba's northern coastline bristles with Soviet-made early warning stations and missile batteries. His solution is the same trick he used in the MiG fly at wave-top altitude, hiding in the radar's sea clutter. Except this time he will be doing it for over an hour in a propeller plane with no ejection seat, no autopilot, and an altimeter that might read 3 feet above the Atlantic. One downdraft, one moment of inattention, and the Cessna cartwheels into the ocean. He knows this contradicts everything he learned as a fighter pilot. A MiG at treetop level is screaming past danger. A Cessna at wave-top level is crawling through it. Communication is the final puzzle. How does he tell Victoria where and when to stand without alerting the state police, who monitor every call and read every letter? He cannot say a single useful word on the telephone. So 2 Mexican women, volunteers connected to the Valadares Foundation, travel to Cuba on tourist visas and hand-deliver a letter Orestes has written by hand. Inside a map of the coastal highway, the precise meeting point near Varadero Beach, the date, the time, a hand-drawn diagram of the approach path. He instructs Victoria to wear orange clothing so he can spot her family from the air against the green and gray landscape. He tells her to rehearse the route from her home to the highway, timing each leg. He warns her to bring nothing that cannot fit in the Cessna's small cabin. No suitcases, no keepsakes, no evidence, and includes one gut-wrenching instruction: do not try to hug me when I land, because I will need to concentrate on keeping the engines running and the plane pointed down the road. If she wraps her arms around him, they could lose the seconds that keep them alive. The timeline he calculates leaves no slack. Take off from Marathon Key at 5:07 p.m., reach the Cuban coast by 6 p.m., land, load his family, and lift off within 3 minutes before Cuban air defense can scramble a response. Cristina Arriaga, executive director of the Valadares Foundation, tells him plainly, if you are not back by 6:30 p.m., you are in big trouble. Miss the road by a quarter mile and he lands in scrubland. Arrives 60 seconds late and a patrol car reaches the highway first. Abort and his family is lost forever. On the morning of December 19th, Orestes sits in the cockpit of the Cessna at Marathon Key. The FAA does not know his destination. The U.S. military has not been notified. Only a handful of friends from the Foundation stand at the edge of the airfield. He has told air traffic control he is going airborne in a U.S.-registered civilian aircraft, just not where he is headed. In 3 hours, he will either hold his sons again or die on a Cuban highway. Can a civilian propeller plane hide from Cuban radar the same way a MiG-23 did? Or is this the miscalculation that gets them all killed? And what happens inside that cockpit when he finally spots the highway and still doesn't know if his family is on it? 5:07 p.m. The Cessna lifts off into a light tropical wind and banks south over the Gulf of Mexico. Orestes pushes the nose down immediately. The altimeter drops, 30 feet, 20, 15. At this altitude, the long shadow of a Coast Guard cutter passes beneath him, close enough to read hull numbers, but the radar paints him as sea clutter. No one on that cutter knows a Cuban exile is skimming the ocean 50 feet above their heads, running a mission no government has authorized. He levels off and flies. For the next hour, the world shrinks to instruments. No coastline, no landmarks, nothing but open Atlantic in every direction. The twin engines hum at constant RPM. Every minute of silence is a minute closer to Cuba and a minute further from any help. He cross-checks a compass heading against a GPS bearing to a single waypoint, the Varadero coast. A few degrees off course at this distance means landfall in the wrong province, or fuel exhaustion over open water with no rescue coming because no one in an official capacity knows where he is. Salt spray flecks the windscreen. He cannot see the horizon clearly at this altitude. The boundary between water and sky dissolves into gray haze. He thinks about the empty chair at his dining table in Alexandria, the place setting Victoria would have occupied. Every mile south is a mile closer to his family and a mile closer to the firing squad that awaits any traitor who sets foot on Cuban soil. 6 p.m. The Cuban coast materializes on the horizon, a dark green line separating sky from sea. This is the most dangerous moment of the flight. To find the highway, he must climb, and climbing means radar visibility. Every foot of altitude is a louder ping on a Cuban radar screen somewhere. He pulls back on the yoke, 100 feet, 200, 300, each one a gamble. He scans through the windscreen, searching for a gray ribbon of pavement among scrubland and palm groves. The coastline is a jumble of vegetation, sandy inlets, and low buildings. Then one burnt orange blur at the edge of the vegetation catches his eye. There is the straight, flat stretch of coastal road. But the question that has kept him awake for weeks slams into him at full force. Are they on it? Did Victoria get the letter? Did she decode the map correctly? Did the state police intercept her on the drive out? He has no way to know. There is no signal, no confirmation, no fallback. Is he about to land on a highway lined with soldiers instead of his family? He crosses the shoreline hugging the treetops, and every second now is a countdown. Cuban fishermen might spot the unmarked Cessna. A soldier at a coastal garrison might telephone a report. A MiG could be vectored from the nearest airbase in minutes. Late afternoon golden light floods the cockpit. No darkness to hide in. No clouds to disappear into. The road unspools beneath him, flanked by low trees and sandy shoulders. He steers toward the rendezvous point with hands that have flown combat missions in Angola but have never shaken like this. He sees them. Orange shirts. A woman and two small figures on the highway shoulder, exactly where the hand-drawn map said they would be. 21 months of letters, hunger strikes, and silence compressed into 3 figures standing on hot asphalt. His heart hammers against his ribs. He kills the throttle, drops the landing gear, and brings the Cessna down onto asphalt that was built for sedans, not aircraft. The wheels chirp on concrete. The plane wobbles. This surface has no centerline lights, no rubber-streaked touchdown zone, and for a moment the Cessna drifts toward the shoulder before he corrects. He rolls to a stop. The engines are still running. 165 miles from Havana, a trader has just parked on Cuban soil, and 3 people in orange are already running toward him. How fast can a 6-year-old sprint across a 4-lane Cuban highway? Because that is the distance between this family and either freedom or a Cuban prison. Victoria spots the plane the instant it drops below the tree line. She grabs Raniel with one hand and Alejandro with the other and runs. 2 years of separation, 2 years of bugged phone calls and patrol vans and officers telling her to forget her husband, all of it compressed into a 60-second dash across hot asphalt. Orestes keeps the engines running. There is no time for the reunion he has imagined every night since March 1991. Victoria reaches the cabin door first. She does not try to embrace him. She remembers the letter's instruction. She pushes Rainiel up and into the rear seat, then lifts Alejandro after him. The boys tumble into the cramped cabin, faces caught between sobbing and disbelief. Victoria climbs in last and pulls the door shut. The latch clicks. 3 minutes have not passed. Orestes slams the throttles forward. The Cessna shudders, lurches down the highway, and lifts off the pavement with the landing gear barely clearing a drainage ditch at the road's edge. He retracts the gear the instant he has clearance, holds the nose down to build speed, then climbs to 200 feet and banks hard north. Behind him, lights flicker on in houses along the coast. A patrol car screeches toward the stretch of highway he just vacated. Somewhere on the base at Santa Clara, the same field he took off from in a MiG 21 months ago, Cuban air defense is now fully alerted. But the Cessna is already dropping back to wave-top altitude, disappearing into the same sea clutter that hit it on the way in. The golden dusk swallows them. The plane that brought him here is slower than anything the Cuban Air Force flies, but slow and invisible beats fast and visible when your altimeter reads 10 feet. In the cabin, Victoria prays quietly. The boys grip the seat frames. Orestes focuses on the compass heading, the fuel gauge, the altimeter hovering at 15 feet. 45 minutes of open Atlantic separate them from American airspace. 45 minutes during which a single Cuban patrol aircraft or a lucky radar return could end everything. He does not turn on the radio to celebrate, does not say a word. He flies. When they cross the 24th parallel into U.S. airspace, he finally exhales, keys the radio, and gives his position to an unidentified civilian aircraft, returning to Marathon, crew of 4 aboard. Back at Marathon Key, the story is already breaking on wire services before the wheels touch down. 10:12 p.m. The Cessna rolls to a stop on the Marathon runway. Orestes cuts the engines and the propellers wind down into silence. In the back seat, Victoria holds both boys against her chest. Rainiel is shaking, and Alejandro has fallen asleep with his head against his mother's arm, exhausted by fear and relief in equal measure. For the first time in 21 months, all 4 of them breathe the same air in the same room, if you can call a Cessna cabin a room. The hardest thing Orestes Lorenzo Perez ever did was not stealing a MiG-23 from the Cuban Air Force. It was walking away from his family that morning in March 1991 and trusting he could keep a promise he had no right to make. On the tarmac, Victoria falls into his arms. Rainiel throws himself onto his father's shoulders. Alejandro, still small enough to be carried, wraps both arms around Orestes' neck. Cristina Arriaga watches from the edge of the crowd. She had given him until 6:30 p.m. He made it with time to spare. Within days, Castro's government, shamed before the international press by a single father in a borrowed propeller plane, quietly agrees to let the remaining family members leave Cuba. Orestes and Victoria become American citizens. He starts a concrete business, raises his sons, and eventually becomes a grandfather. The Cessna 310 that carried his family to freedom is later destroyed by a hurricane, as if the plane understood its one purpose and, having served it, had nothing left to do. It was not the MiG that made Orestes Lorenzo Perez brave. Any pilot can fly away from a dictatorship. Only a father would fly back into one. If you want to see what happens when the CIA abducts the wrong man, tortures him for 5 months in total darkness, and then has to decide what to do with their own mistake, click here.